On August 26, 1346, on a damp, muddy stretch of land near the town of Crecy in northern France, about 9,000 English soldiers paused to rest on a low, gentle hill. They were exhausted. They had spent weeks marching, raiding, and withdrawing, moving from the coast through villages, always with French forces pressing close behind. Approaching from the opposite direction was one of the largest, most splendid armies Europe had seen in that age. 30,000 men under King Philip VI of France. Among them rode the armoured knights, men who carried centuries of noble tradition on their shoulders. They sat astride great war horses, powerful animals raised and trained since foalhood. To them, armour and steel were symbols of destiny, proof that nothing could stand before their charge. In those ranks were ancient noble families, counts and dukes, heirs to vast estates. Allied lords had travelled from far-off realms as well, knights of the Holy Roman Empire, warriors from eastern lands, and even the King of Bohemia, who, though blind, came so that he would not miss the glory of battle. They advanced with near-total confidence, confidence so absolute that even before the battle began, French lords quarrelled among themselves. Who would be the one to strike down the English king? Who would capture him alive and carry him home in chains? They did not question whether they would win, only who would claim the honour. And yet, just 4 hours later, on the very same field where they had marched so proudly, around 1,500 of those men lay dead. Noble lineages silenced, veteran knights unmoving, 11 princes among them, men once considered pillars of the feudal order. On the English side, the losses numbered only about 40, not 400, just 40, a disparity that seems impossible. And this reversal did not come from sorcery, nor from any secret weapon. It came from the archers, ordinary men, most of them born to farms, labour and hardship. Some had once been criminals. Many had nothing but their training and their resolve. They carried long bows of simple wood, plain, unadorned, worth far less than a French knight's gleaming armour. Yet it was these humble weapons that brought an end to the age of the armoured cavalry charge, an age that had dominated European warfare for 5 centuries. Crecy was not just a victory, it was a turning point, a moment when an old order cracked and a new understanding of warfare took shape. It opened the gates to what would become the 100 Years' War, a conflict so long that generations would be born and die without ever seeing its end. In this story, we will walk together through the causes, the land, the people, and the unfolding of the battle itself, to understand how one afternoon could reshape the history of the Western world. If you have ever read about the Battle of Crécy, heard stories of it, or were told of it by a teacher or a family member, we invite you to share a few words in the comments below. History becomes most alive when we share our memories and perspectives. Now, let us move to that afternoon, when the two armies first saw each other across the damp fields of Crecy. That year, King Edward III of England landed his forces on the coast of Normandy. He claimed that the French crown could rightfully pass through his mother's lineage, and therefore he had a legitimate claim to it. But his claim was not merely spoken. Edward marched with roughly 15,000 men into France and burned villages, plundered towns, and devastated farmland, a tactic Europeans of the time called chevaucher. Its purpose was not to seize territory, but to humiliate, to frighten, and to demonstrate that the King of France could not protect his own subjects. One of the cities struck hardest was Caen, a populous and prosperous place. After sacking it and taking everything of value, the English army moved north toward Calais, a stronghold under English control. They intended to reach safety before the French army could cut them off. Meanwhile, in Paris, King Philip VI of France could not ignore the devastation. With the honour of the crown and the dignity of the kingdom challenged, he ordered every noble and vassal to raise their forces and join him in the field. Soon, he had gathered one of the largest armies in Europe at the time. About 30,000 to 35,000 soldiers, including roughly 12,000 fully armoured cavalry reinforcements from territories under the Holy Roman Empire, and King John of Bohemia himself, who, though blind, refused to be absent from what he believed would be a moment of glory. These men were not merely soldiers. They were symbols of lineage, of power passed from father to son, of a feudal pride built and preserved over centuries. The French knight, the icon of an era. A mounted knight of that age was nothing like the common foot soldier. From childhood, he learned to ride, to wield the lance, to fight with the sword, and to uphold strict codes of honor. His armor was not only protection, it was status. A single suit could cost as much as a village, perhaps more than a peasant family could earn in a lifetime. For generation after generation, people believed that war belonged to the nobility, that it was the arena where courage proved itself, and where noble blood confirmed its supremacy. Foot soldiers were expected to stand below. Archers were considered little more than nuisances. And what of the English? They did not arrive at Crecy with splendor. Many of them were farmers, laborers, even men once convicted of crimes and released in exchange for military service. Their primary weapon was the longbow, a simple wooden bow nearly 2 meters in length. It looked unremarkable, but its power lay in the hands that had drawn it since childhood. In England, the law required every man to practice archery every Sunday after church. Children grew up with bowstrings in their fingers. Over years and decades, the bones of their shoulders and arms reshaped themselves under the strain. Marks modern archaeologists can still identify. They had no shining armor, no war horses, but they had discipline, training, and a quiet, enduring patience. A figure to remember. Among the English that day stood one young man worth noting, Prince Edward, the son of the English king, later known as the Black Prince, not for cruelty, but for the dark armor he favored. This was the first great battle of his life. He stood on the front line, beside the archers and infantry, and the outcome of Crecy would shape not only the course of the war, but the course of his destiny. When the English reached the area near Crecy, they had already marched for many days, carrying spoils taken from Caen. They were tired, but they arrived just early enough to choose the ground and prepare it. King Edward III studied the landscape with great care. He selected a gentle hill, not high, but steep enough that any cavalry charging uphill would lose its speed and strength. For heavily armoured horsemen, that difference could decide life or death. He arranged his army into 3 divisions, placing the longbowmen on both flanks, forming a wide, open V shape. This formation allowed arrows from each side to overlap and converge onto the very path the French cavalry would charge through, like 2 strong currents of water forcing into a narrow channel. In front of the English line, soldiers dug shallow trenches, raised small mounds of earth, concealed pits, and, most importantly, set sharpened stakes angled outward. The stakes were not large, but if a horse hit one at full gallop, it would fall forward violently, bringing the rider down into the mud, turning a proud knight in shining armor into a trapped heavy target unable to stand. Mud, a simple detail, would become a silent enemy in this battle. The English weapon. Their primary weapon was the longbow, a simple piece of wood, about 6 feet in length, carefully shaped and strung with sinew or hardened fiber. It appeared humble, but in the hands of a man who had trained since childhood, it could send 10 to 12 arrows into the air every minute. An arrow could travel more than 200 yards. At closer range, it could pierce the weak points of armor, the eye slit, under the arm, the inside of the elbow, the back of the knee. A longbowman did not need to kill with every shot. If he brought down a horse, if he staggered a knight, the entire formation behind would falter. Why the English preparation worked. The English arrived first, They rested. They ate. They breathed steadily again. They waxed their bowstrings to keep them dry. They set their stakes. They dug. They waited. Meanwhile, the French arrived in the opposite condition. They had been pursuing the English for days, marching hard, filled with anger over the burning of their villages. By the time they reached Crecy, the sun was already sinking. Men and horses were exhausted. Many had not eaten. From a distant ridge, King Philip VI saw this clearly. He ordered his army to halt and make camp for the night. They would attack in the morning. But that command was ignored. Among the French, pride burned hotter than discipline. The noble lords did not want to wait. They saw the English as fewer, far from home, worn by marching. They believed this was the perfect moment to seize glory before the king's eyes. And no one wanted to be the one who arrived too late to take honor. Men pressed from behind, while the front ranks had no time to form. Orders were still being given when lances lowered. Flags snapped in the evening wind, but without coordination. The battle began, not from strategy, but from ambition. And then, the rain came. Dark clouds drew across the sky, and a sudden shower swept over the field. In those few minutes, the greatest difference between the two armies became clear. The English unstrung their bows and tucked the strings safely under their cloaks to keep them dry. The Genoese crossbowmen on the French side did not, and could not, do the same. Their bowstrings absorbed water, stretched and lost power. A small detail, perhaps, but sometimes rain is the hand that turns the wheel of history. When the rain finally stopped, the French began to form their lines. At the front stood about 5,000 Genoese crossbowmen, experienced mercenaries. They were not nobles. They fought for pay, not for honor. But they were at a disadvantage from the very first moment. The strings of their crossbows had been soaked, weakening their power. Worse still, the large shields, the pavises, used to protect them while reloading had been left behind, stuck with the baggage that had not yet arrived. So they were forced to move forward with no cover, exposed on the open slope. When they reached firing range, they raised their crossbows and loosed a first volley. But the bolts fell short, scattered and weak. Many never even reached the English lines. And at that moment, from both flanks of the English formation, the longbows began to sing. A deep, sweeping sound, like wind tearing through a forest of bamboo. Then the sky darkened. Tens of thousands of arrows fell like a rain of iron. The English archers did not shoot slowly or ceremonially. They shot continuously, rhythmically, fast, precise. 12 arrows per man, every minute. Which meant that with every breath, more than 50,000 arrows swept down the slope. The Genoese turned and ran. Not out of cowardice, but because there was simply no way to fight back. But behind them were the French knights. And pride turned to brutality. Some of the French nobles shouted, "Cut them down, they're in the way." So the French cavalry charged forward, trampling their own mercenaries, hacking down men who were only trying to escape, just to clear a path. In the chaos of screams, steel, and hooves grinding bone into the mud, the French vanguard weakened itself before it had even touched the English. The first cavalry assault. After breaking through the Genoese ranks, the French knights lowered their lances and urged their horses up the hill. On a dry field, their momentum might have been devastating, like a hammer swung by gods. But Crecy was mud. Their war horses, heavy and armoured, sank with each step. Their breathing laboured, their movements slow and weighted. And above them, the arrows continued to fall, so dense that many could not even see ahead. A knight did not have to be pierced through his armour to die. If his horse was hit in the leg, in the eye, or simply panicked under fire, the knight fell. When the first horse collapsed, it became an obstacle. The next horse stumbled over it. The rider behind crashed into both. The charge lost speed. then stopped completely. Knights who fell to the ground struggled under the crushing weight of their armor, unable to rise, becoming still targets. The second charge, the third, and then the 16th. No one withdrew. No one wanted to be seen as lacking courage. So they climbed the hill again, and again. They died, and returned to die again. With each assault, the mud mixed more with blood. The slope changed from slick earth to a deep, sucking mire. Knights at the rear could not see the failure in front. They were being pushed from behind by the mass of men still advancing. An entire social order built to win, now trading lives for pride. The moment of King John of Bohemia. When the battle was clearly lost, someone spoke to King John, blind for more than 10 years. "Your Majesty, the field cannot be saved." He answered softly, but firmly. A king of Bohemia does not turn his back while his men still fight. He commanded that his horse be tied by the reins to the horses of 2 knights beside him. They led him straight into the heart of the battlefield, where arrows still fell, where cries and the clash of steel blurred into one. He could not see, but he raised his sword, as a warrior determined to end his life in honor. When the battlefield fell silent, 3 bodies were found side by side. The reins still bound them together. The blind king had chosen death with dignity, a farewell to the age he embodied. As darkness settled over the fields of Crecy, the sounds of bowstrings faded, the thunder of hooves was gone, and only the faint cries of the dying remained. The English did not move from their positions. They held their formation through the night, for they could hardly believe that a victory so overwhelming could have come so swiftly. They lit fires, stood watch, and listened to the silence between the moans in the mud. From time to time, a fallen French knight stirred, and a final gasp rose into the night, then vanished. When the sun rose the next morning, the sight before them was something no one could have imagined. More than 1,500 members of the French nobility, counts, dukes, knights, princes, lay scattered across the mud. Many of them had once been the pride of great families, lords of vast estates, commanders of regional armies. Now they lay among hired mercenaries, with no distinction left between rank and birth. Death had made everyone equal. Chroniclers wrote that crows and carrion birds arrived in such numbers that they grew so fat they could no longer lift themselves into the air. They simply hopped from body to body, as if the field were no longer earth, but flesh. For days afterward, villagers from the surrounding region came to gather armor, helmets, gold bracelets, silver belts. The wealth of noble houses changed hands in silence. The collapse of a belief held for 5 centuries. For generations, Europe had believed that the armored knight on horseback was the supreme instrument of war. That honor was the true strength of battle. But Crecy proved that. Not bloodline, but skill decides victory. Not armor, but ground and tactics shape outcomes. Not courage, but discipline and preparation are the keys to survival. It was as though a great door had closed, marking the end of the age when mounted nobility ruled the battlefield. From this point forward, the common longbowman became the most feared force in war, and beneath the military defeat lay a deeper shock. If peasants could kill nobles, then how long could a society built on noble blood continue to stand? Impact on the 100 Years' War. The victory at Crecy did not end the conflict. It began a new chapter. The English advanced toward Calais, and the siege of that city would last nearly a year, securing England a strong foothold in France for decades. In the years that followed, Europe would see 2 battles just like Crecy, Poitiers in 1356 and Agincourt in 1415. In both, French cavalry once again charged through mud and arrows, and met the same fate. It would take nearly a century for France to truly change its strategy and abandon the illusion that honor alone could win wars. The Battle of Crécy is the story of a world changing. On one side, the shining steel of the knight, filled with pride and faith in lineage and tradition. On the other, the humble archers, poor, without titles, armed only with discipline earned through thousands of hours of practice in the cold. When the battle ended, those who survived carried home a new understanding of war and of humanity. That true strength does not lie in splendor, but in knowledge, preparation, and the ability to adapt. If you have found meaning in this story today, we invite you to stay with us as we continue to explore history with calm reflection and respect.